So today we're discussing the peer review practice. The idea of peer review goes back, they say, to the 9th century in Syria, where the first doctor had his notes peer reviewed. And it's evolved since then as being one of the primary ways that truth is established in academic communities, and ways in which truth in an academic community is different than truth in other communities. There was a well-known philosopher who once said that he never trusted academic papers until he married a scientist and found out how the peer review process was used to establish the truth of a paper in ways that are different than, say, truth in a journalism article or other kinds of writing. The idea, there was one controversy, for example, in Science magazine, where an article that was accepted in Science magazine was later withdrawn because they couldn't replicate the data, and the editor argued that as long as the article had been peer reviewed, then it was true until something else showed that it was not true. And that was the nature of what truth was. And so peer review has a central process in academic work and establishing the nature of academic work. So every journal has its own policies regarding peer review. Here, this is again the Journal of Second Language Writing, which we talked about before. I'm on the editorial board. It states that it's an objective process, and that's part of being double-blind. Again, you don't know, as a reviewer, you don't know who wrote the article, and the author will never know who you are. Eventually, you do figure out who wrote the article, particularly if it gets accepted. If you reject an article, you may never know who rejected it. The process, as we've mentioned before, when you submit an article, the editor of the journal will decide whether it's worthy of being peer reviewed. And they can make a decision to reject it right away if they don't think it's suitable, or they think sometimes it might be suitable for another journal. And if they do think it's a possible article, then they'll send it out for peer review. Normally there are 2 to 3 reviewers. In this journal, the editor chooses the peer reviewer, but some of you have seen in your guidelines that you can choose the peer reviewers, and you can even choose some people that you don't want to peer review, that you know may take a differing opinion. Now, the editor makes the final decision, even if you choose the editor, because one thing, they can't always get these people. Peer reviewing, as we've mentioned, is not rewarded. It's what they call pro bono. You do it for the good of the academic community in which you are. So it's sometimes very difficult to get peer reviewers. And as I said, people say, well, how long does it take? They usually give out some guidelines to the reviewers. A month, 2 months, 3 months. I have all kinds of guidelines. But it's up to the reviewer to get it done. I missed the last 2 deadlines. Both of them happened to fall when I was on vacation. I didn't have time to do it. One of them I got done a week late. The other took me 2 or 3 weeks late before I got it done. In fact, the other one I totally forgot about. And that happens. So editors know that. There's not much they can do. They can remove you from their database if they want, but really once they've given you the review, they're pretty stuck with you. The reviewers can turn it down. Usually I'm sent an abstract not the whole article, and I look at the abstract and I decide whether I feel I can review it or whether I have time to review it. But once I accept the review, the author, unless I really don't do anything, the editor, has to wait for me to get it done. So the process is not perfect. It could be a little slow. And again, as a writer, some of you already know that you're under pressure to get published, but at the same time, the system doesn't always respond to that kind of pressure. Journals don't always give you clear guidelines as to what acceptable articles are. This journal has certain guidelines. Is it original? And again, I've stressed in this course that you want to say it's original. You need to stress the originality. Is methodologically sound. It's kind of interesting, and I noticed some of the journals have to have special people in my field who do statistics, because we get a lot of articles that deal with statistics, and a lot of us are English majors and we don't deal with statistics. But it's up to, again, something you have to look at, see if the methodology is good. Ethical guidelines. We'll talk later about ethical guidelines. Clearly presented results and support the conclusions. And again, this is a writing problem. That's one of the things we're focusing on in tutorials. References previous work. It says correctly, but there is a great deal of emphasis. This is an area where you frequently get criticism, is if you don't have the references that the author thinks you should have, and well written. And again, that's a judgment call. Journals nowadays are giving more guidelines about how long it's going to take. This journal says 8 to 12 weeks. If there's a contradiction, or if they ask for 2 reviewers and they're split, they may have to go to a 3rd reviewer, which is going to delay the process. And sometimes, if the reviewer doesn't do their job, they have to start over again. The report is usually then, the reviewers send the report to the editor, and then based on that report, the editor makes the decision. And again, we've discussed the fact that some editors do exactly what the reviewers say, some editors make their own decisions. It's really up to the editor to make that decision. And normally the editor's decision is final. It's possible to argue with the editor's decision, but most of the time, if the paper is rejected, it's best to move on to another journal. But if it's rejected and resubmit, most people consider it best that if you resubmit it. Of course, at that point, when you get rejected and resubmit, you can withdraw the article. And in fact, you can withdraw the article at any time if for some reason you find a problem with the article, you can pull it out of the peer review process. So this is just a history of what I've reviewed for another journal, Language Learning and Technology. So this just tells me, this is only for me, what articles that I've reviewed in the last 4 or 5 years, and what the results was. So this goes back to 2010, tells me the date of completion, and then it tells me whether a revision was submitted or not. Quickly, if we've kind of flipped to the end, this was the latest one I did. I think I mentioned this to you, September 10th. And so usually they ask the authors, are you going to submit a revision or not? So, and I think I mentioned they had given the authors till January to get the resubmission in. So I guess it says here, see, I don't know this, the author did agree to submit the paper. The ones that reject are not a major revision. Now, I don't know what happened to this article. It says here a major revision was submitted, but it's out of me unless I kind of go to the journal and look this up. I don't know whether or not the paper was submitted. This is the form this journal gives me to fill out for each paper. This tells you, you can see here, I accepted it on July 30th, but it took me till September 6th to get it done. Of course, I was on vacation until September 1st. So then I came back from vacation and I had this email saying, oh, you're late with this. And I said, okay, I'll submit it, at that weekend. So I told them by the 6th, I think I said by the 8th, actually, that I could submit this. And so it's a little late. I think they had given me 2 months, which would have been, the end of August. So they had only given me 30 days. In a sense, it doesn't matter. I mean, either you do it or you don't. So they had given me till the end of August to get it done. I had missed that deadline and I got it done a couple weeks late. This journal doesn't ask too many questions. Some journals actually have a whole form to fill out. This journal just asks you accept, major revision, minor revision, reject, and whether you want to be a reviewer again. Now, one thing I wanted to show here, were most journals now seem to have 2 sets of comments, something you can say to the editor and something to the author. And in some ways, if you want to really be nasty or you're really upset, you can kind of vent your feelings in the comments to the editor and try to be more objective in the comments to the author. So in the editor comments, I assume this might have been the second revision. I didn't check to see how the paper was revised, but I still thought the paper had many problems. I didn't like the literature review. I didn't like the results. I'm not sure the meaning of their definition. So I'm really not very happy with it, with anything about the paper. I don't know how much results. And then here, this part here, are the comments to the author. And again, you can see I give very detailed. This is pretty much what I do in class. I go through each, with students, I go through and I made 25 points here to the author based on each section. And I try to be objective sounding. The use of the term does not give a clear picture. Before arguing that there are a few studies, the author needs to argue why results is needed. This is one, I mentioned this is one of my typical things that bother me when someone says there is little research on the topic. This kind of gives you an idea of how I would respond to that. So this is what the review looks like. It goes through these kinds of details. So that's the overview of the peer review process. I, as a reviewer, rarely get any feedback from the editor about the quality of the review. I assume if they don't like it, they just won't ask me to do it again, or if I'm persistently late. But they never say that was a good review, that was not a good review. As I mentioned before, when I had this conflict with a friend of mine over an article, she didn't say it was a bad review. She just published the article even though I rejected it. So it was silent. She never explained it. She never told me she was going to published the article. I just picked up the journal one day, saw the article, and that was how I found out about it. I don't know always. Often they send me a letter about what they say. So the only feedback I normally get is sometimes I get to see the decision. Normally they will send me the other reviewers' notes so that I can compare them to my own. But outside of that, I receive very little feedback. So that this wraps up our discussion of the peer review process. Next time I'm going to look at peer review from the point of view of the writer and how the writer might want to respond to comments from the reviewers. Thank you.